Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Chax Chat. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor as well as an accessibility wizard here at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am also one of the other accessibility wizards here at Chax Training and Consulting. Although someone did mention, I think I'm going to start announcing myself as the PDF Whisperer. The PDF Whisperer. So, yeah. But Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And if you'd like your certification too, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org and click on certifications to learn more.
Yes.
Chad, koi pond. We haven't had koi talk in forever.
No, we haven't.
My koi pond is going phenomenally. It is crystal clear and all my koi are doing wonderfully. I've got my secondary filtration all set up and going. And it was just a dream to sit out there and just watch them swimming by, and my giant koi from Japan just come by like big giant blimps just coming across the front window. It's really great. So,
you finally got the water cleared up?
Yes, got it all squared away. Yep. And then from a garden perspective, we just harvested all of our garlic. So I ended up with about 20 cloves, and these are big. These are elephant garlic cloves, so they're giant. Yeah. A couple of them were single clove, like an onion bulb, and then most everybody else was a
regular head of garlic.
Yeah, I think it has to do with cold snapping. When you cold snap them properly, they split into cloves. When you don't, they can stay a single bulb. So. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, where I live, they definitely got cold. You know what I mean? It wasn't an issue. It's interesting though. You're not that far ahead of me because like the bottom couple of leaves on my garlic are starting to turn brown. Yeah. So probably next couple of weeks, I'll probably be harvesting mine. Yeah.
I looked at him and said, what would Chad do?
Well, and so on my end, I am just about finished building my chicken coop.
Oh, good job.
That I've been working on. So I'm just putting the mesh around the outside, to keep the chickens in.
You're using 1/4 inch wire. You're not using chicken wire, right?
I am. What, 1 inch?
So chicken wire is the octagon looking wire.
Yeah.
Right? You're not using that, right?
I am.
Just know that keeps out 0 predators. Raccoons, coyotes, foxes will tear that stuff apart and eat the heads off your chickens. You will go out there one morning and find headless chickens. It does 0. It keeps chickens in, but that's it. So just know you really want to do the 1/2 inch hardwire cloth or better. That's more bulletproof.
Okay.
Trying to keep heads out. So up to you. But yeah. We see the posts all the time online where people show something ate my chickens. It's always a raccoon because they're all left with their heads off and they just destroyed the wire because they can just chew right through it. So.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, awesome. Well, today we're going to talk about TOCs, Table of Contents. And I think this is one that confuses a lot of people. So I'm hoping that by the end of this episode, you're going to have a pretty good handle on what makes a good TOC. And why you should use them. And I think we should start there, Chad. Well, if I have bookmarks in my document, why should I use a TOC?
Well, you've brought up before, Dax, and this is an area where you've got more experience than I do on this area. You've pointed out in the past that bookmarks are actually really difficult for users of assistive technology to get to, right? Because you've got to like jump through all these hoops to get, because when you use assistive technology, you're kind of navigating through the content of the document, but you've got to get out of the content to the interface element of Acrobat.
Well, and there are 3 key areas for the interface of Acrobat from an assistive technology standpoint. When you press F6, you move from the active page pane to the bookmarks or sidebar. And then when you press F6 again, you move up into the main navigation at the top, file, the tabs, and all that stuff. So it's this circle. So you're on page, then you go counterclockwise to the right, then counterclockwise up to the top. The problem is that, and of course, shift goes the other direction. So if I want to activate a bookmark, I got to go over to the bookmarks bar and activate it by pressing F6. Then I've got to navigate down to the bookmark.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what if the bookmarks is not the active navigation pane? Well, so are you saying F6 goes to the navigation pane, or it'll go directly to the bookmarks?
It just goes directly to the sidebar, whatever sidebar is open. So it could be the tags tree, it could be anything. Yeah. So hopefully if you've set up bookmarks in your document, you can set your document so that it opens with the bookmarks panel already open. That's a document property in the initial view. So you typically, if you have bookmarks, it's a good idea to actually do that. So that you can give people the benefit of, hey, there are bookmarks and here's an easy way to get to it. So that's in the initial view of your document. So if that's open, you press F6, you move from the on page into the bookmarks bar. Then you find the bookmark you want to listen to and you press enter and nothing happens. The on page content moves to page 12, but that's it.
So now you've got to jump from the bookmarks panel back to the document to get to the content.
Right. So shift F6 goes backward, but that only dumps you to the top of the page.
Right.
And now you've got to try to find out, is that bookmark at the top of the page or is that bookmark somewhere in the middle? And if it is, the bookmarks don't take you directly they're not a destination, they are a navigation. And that's what sucks about bookmarks.
And again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but when if you ever create bookmarks manually, you have the ability to zoom the page to the level that you want, which is great for somebody with sight, for somebody with vision or even good vision, right? For that matter. So, anybody who's not, consuming content in that way, it's of no benefit whatsoever, Well,
you assume that that's taking you to the right place. And then you go to the first heading and it starts reading the page and you're like, okay, is it or isn't it? Now, in fairness, most times the bookmark is to the specific chapter page. It's not like it never works. It works probably 70% of the time, but there are lots of times where it doesn't. And you've got multi-page content where you want them to get to a specific subsection, to a specific H2. Because remember, when you have a document, go ahead. I'll let you go through it.
No. I want you to keep going because I think you're explaining it very well.
So when you have a document that has no bookmarks, you can tell Acrobat to generate bookmarks based on heading levels. And if you've used proper headings in your document, you can tell it use H1s only, or use H1s and H2s, or even H1s, H2s, H3s. I wouldn't go much past that in a bookmark situation. The crappy part is that Acrobat does not nest those heading levels in the bookmarks bar. Now, Access PDF and PDFix and Common Look will all nest the bookmarks if you tell it to auto-generate bookmarks appropriately, and that's great. In fact, even Access PDF will let you style the content and say, I want my H1s to be bold and my H2s to be blue and not bold.
Which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, and you can have them open or close. So the idea here is there are other tools that allow you to get more creative with the bookmarks panel, but Acrobat does allow you to make bookmarks based on the heading levels, but it just dumps them all in a single level. And then I have to spend 20 minutes moving them in because my ADHD brain needs them to be organized in the right way. Yeah. And in the end, the bookmarks don't take you, if it's an H2 on the same page as an H1, it still just takes you to page 6. It doesn't actually take you to the place. That's the difference between a bookmark and a destination. And destinations, I would love to say work inside Acrobat, but I have yet to ever get a destination to actually work in using just Acrobat alone. Now, if you are in InDesign, you can set a text anchor, or when you set up your TOC, and this is where TOCs are really great, TOCs use destinations. So you can have it move directly to a piece of text. And that's why a TOC, that was a long way around to say, that's why a TOC on page is a better navigation for everyone than bookmarks.
I was just going to say, like, if you follow it along with everything we've just been talking about for the last 10 minutes, you'll appreciate the value of the table of contents, because the table of contents is content within the document. So as you're navigating everything else, your headings, your graphics, your lists, whatever, a table of contents is content on the page. And Microsoft Word, Adobe InDesign, when you use the table of contents feature in those source applications, when you create that table of contents, the hyperlinks are automatically generated and will take you to that section of the document, which is, for me, to me, it's such a win-win, because it's super helpful for a sighted user. It's extremely beneficial to a user of assistive technology, and it just helps us all navigate the document with purpose, right? What better way of navigating a document to read the table of contents? These are all the sections of the document. What do you want to read about? And you say, follow that link. It takes you right to the page, and boom. It's just an amazing experience.
Well, I'd like to take a moment to talk about why people don't use a table of contents. Right? Because people don't, we find pushback all the time. Why? I don't use table of contents. Well, why not? And I love hearing the answers. And I want to share with you some of the ones that I hear.
Okay.
So the first one that I hear is, well, I don't know how, it takes too long to style my table of contents. I want it to look a certain way. And I'm like, that's why you create styles based on heading levels. And when you assign the TOC, you say, hey, this TOC needs to be this style. And but in fairness, you have to create a separate TOC style for the TOC, like a font size or margin or whatever it is. So there is some work there, but it is a little extra work, but it's totally doable and not hard.
And it's automated.
Yeah.
Right. That's the part that I can't get over. It's like, so I want to get this straight. In InDesign, I basically go to the layout menu, say table of contents, give it a little bit of instruction, and it builds the entire table of contents for me.
Yep.
I don't have to do anything. Right. And I will say, I pride myself. I have seen in my lifetime a lot of wacky table of contents that people create. And they do it manually, right? So some people like to create
big giant numbers,
the big number, right? And then the description after it. I pride myself that I can usually make it work using the table of contents feature. I really love the challenge. I really do.
Well, and so what I typically do, here's a workflow tip for everybody listening. What I typically do before I start a table of contents is I manually create a single entry. And I style it just manually. I make it bold. I set my tab. I set my dot leaders. I set my subheadings. I do whatever I'm going to do, colors and indents or whatever. And I'll do one for my first level TOC, second level TOC. And I almost never do more than 2 levels. So, and then I just highlight that and create a style based on that element. So that's my TOC H1. And I label it that way. TOC space H1, TOC space H2, right? And then that way, then when I go into build my automatic table of contents, I say, it asks you what heading levels do you want to include? I say H1. And then it says, what style do you want to use for that? And I say, TOC H1. I think people get lost because they usually just say, use the default style. Well, if my H1 on the page is 36 point because it's giant for the chapter heading, that's not going to work for your table of contents. And then you get screwy. Yeah, no. So that's number one, why people don't use the table of contents. The next one I hear is I don't want it to say the same thing, or my entry in the document is much longer than what I want the entry in my TOC to be.
Dax, this is like the bane of my existence, right? Like, because this is what kills me when people, because I often get documents from people and they've manually built their table of contents. And I'm like, well, this is no good because nothing's hyperlinked, you know? So I'll be like, okay, no problem. I'll automate it. But then I discover that the entry that they put in the table of contents does not exist anywhere in their document.
Yes.
And I'm like, why? Why would you do this? It makes no sense, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a frustrating thing. But now, again, and keep in mind, guys, we're primarily talking about Adobe InDesign when we're talking about this. I mean, Word has a feature too. It's not as robust, but Word has it as well. But there's a way in InDesign that you can cheat. And the way that I do this is like, if the client wants it to say something that doesn't exist in the document, you can put a frame at the top of the page and make sure the frame partially overlaps the edge of the page. And you can then grab that content and suck it into the table of contents to achieve the result that you're looking for.
The challenge that I would want to understand about that is that TOCs create text anchors.
Yeah.
And if your text is just touching the top of that page, it's going to anchor to the top of that page.
To the top of the page
only. So typically what I do is I just make a floating text box off to the left of my TOC page that contains the custom names of whatever I need to change later on. So I leave my automatic table of contents to the very end of my document. And then one of the last things I do is I go in and I edit that automatic table of contents, and I just edit the text, right? Because the link still stays a link, and I just change it or add the colon or the soft return or whatever it is that they want to do for that entry. And because if you try to do that and keep it up, you're constantly making that change if you do it every time you generate a new TOC. So I usually just make myself a little helper text box off to the left, and then I'll just do that as a last swipe before I exit.
And that is a good point to remember. Like, when you're using the automatic table of contents, you can go in and edit that text and it will still function correctly. It'll still link to it. You know, it's not like you'll break it if you modify the text that's there, but just know that if you ever add a page or whatever, and then you go and say update table of contents, that all gets lost. That all gets wiped out, you know?
Here's the last one. And this is the one that it is one that bugs me to my core. It is the excuse why people refuse to title the title of my document as an H1. They say, well, if you title, the argument is the title of your document, there is a style, a tag called title. Although JAWS and NVDA do not read it, it just sound voices at a paragraph. The argument for, but Dax, that doesn't matter, is because if I make this an H1, it appears in my table of contents as the first entry. And I don't want that. I don't want the cover to appear as the first entry in my table of contents. And I'm like, great, make it a duplicate H1 style.
Exactly.
And you don't include that one. And then you're like, you can totally keep it from dumping into your table of contents. It's very easily.
It's so easy. It's so easy. Yeah. And even similar to what we were just talking about, like, I have clients where they'll kind of selectively choose the heading that they want to include in the table of contents.
Sure.
Right? Like there's 20 headings in there, but they only want 9 of them to appear in the table of contents.
Yeah.
And so what I usually do is I'll simply duplicate whatever the name of my style is, whatever, like heading or subhead, whatever, and I'll call it heading no TOC.
Right.
And that's what I apply to the ones that I don't want to appear in the table of contents. And that solves the problem, right? It makes it super easy.
I want everyone listening to hear what we're talking about. There is not a single problem we can't solve when it comes to making a document accessible. There is no excuse that you can give why you shouldn't use a TOC, because there is an answer. There's always a way to make it accessible. Now, I have seen some TOCs with really weird borders or really stylized text and how they want it with lots of soft returns and things. You can still make those automatic table of contents, but sometimes the machinations, the hoops you have to jump through to make those accessible and live TOCs is much harder than just simply manually doing it because you've got 7 of them and just creating the TOC in your PD, in the resulting PDF. So it isn't that you should always do an automatic table of contents, but 95% of the time, yes.
Well, and what you were just saying, Dax, about like the soft returns,
sure,
right? And so I can usually make it work without doing the soft returns,
right?
Because in InDesign, there's a feature. It's actually 2 features you have to use together, which is right indent,
yep,
and last line right indent. And that allows you to determine your right margin in those paragraphs. And if I tweak it enough, I can usually get them all to be where I need them to be without a single soft return in the text, you know? And that's what allows you to keep it automated, right? Yep. You know what I mean? Now, let's talk for a second about where table of contents, I don't want to say fails, but can be maybe not an ideal experience.
Okay.
Right? And I'm talking about the dot leader.
Okay, sure. Yes.
So the dot leader is there for the benefit of us with sight, right? The invention of the dot leader was to guide the eye over to the page number, because from a design perspective, it's nice to have all those page numbers lined up on the right side, but sometimes there's a significant gap between the entry and the page number. So somebody developed the dot leader that said, okay, cool, I'm going to guide your eye using all these dots, that go across the page. Well, the traditional way of achieving that result is by adding a tab stop. And then on that tab stop, there's a field called leader.
Yep.
There's actually a field. And you could put a period in there, or some people will put like a period space, or, you know what I mean, to try to, space them out. And that will then fill the tab with those characters. Okay. Yep. What we all need to remember is those characters are content.
Yep.
They're literally characters
just
in the
like
text.
Live text. They are live text to be read.
And so JAWS and NVDA treat these differently.
Yes.
There was a time, I believe it was JAWS, that read every dot, right? Like it would say, whatever the entry was, and it would say dot, 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 dot. You're just going to kind of go all the way across. JAWS, I think fairly recently, not recently, but in more recent years, they'll say like, doesn't it say like 30 dot?
Yes. So it used to say ... 6 ... 7. Now it says 30 ... because it counts the number of dots in between that last piece of text and the number, which is really hard when you have numbered systems where it's 4.2, page 5.1. You're going to hear 30.4.2, and that's really a cognitive barrier. Well, that's not every document. It is it can definitely be a sticky wicket, as you would say,
because the page number is typically what you hear after it announces how many dots there are. So it'll be like 30.5, and you're like, wait, what? You're like, "What? I don't understand, you know? So that could, and then NVDA does it differently. Do you remember what NVDA does? I can't remember.
NVDA, interesting. I thought it was actually both of them did it the same way.
Maybe they do.
Well, we'll have to go back and check. But this goes back to listening to your document with a screen reader.
Right.
But the idea here is that neither one of them artifact the dot leader. They don't make the dot leader go away. And so you have to do something deliberate if you want to remove that. And a lot of people, what they do is they go into the tags tree and they start artifacting, separating out the dot leader and creating artifacts. Now, I know that, does PDFix do artifacting dot leaders automatically?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Okay. I know that Common Look does, and I want to say, I'm not sure about Access PDF. I don't remember if that was I don't think Access PDF does. I think Common Look's the only one that does. Yeah. So you have to go in and manually do that, right?
Right.
However, Chad, you've got a solution if you have control over the source file.
Yeah. So in InDesign, and if anybody, I'm going to try to explain this, but if anybody would like a more detailed explanation, you know what though? I think I created a video, Dax. I think I did a video. I'll have to go search for that and see if I can find it.
You did, actually.
Cool.
If you just search dot leader Chad Chilius, I'm pretty sure this is how I found it. Yeah. So dot leader Chad Chilius. The first video is an InDesign secrets or Creative Pro video called InDesign, how to create custom dot leaders. And this is one that Chad made in 2024. That is how to do what he's about to explain.
Yeah, and so I take a slightly different approach in that I create a character style. And in the character style, I turn on the underline feature. And then in the style, I choose a dotted underline.
Right. And you can actually choose a Japanese dotted underline too, which is that wider spaced dot system you were talking about.
Well, and sometimes what I have to do is you can also go into the stroke styles and create a custom dot because then you could adjust the pattern length and make it exactly what you want it to be.
Sure.
But anyway, character style, underline, dotted. And then in InDesign, I'll create a paragraph style for my TOC entry. And then in the grep style, I will tell it to apply that leader character style to all of my either, for a lot of people, it might be your tab character.
Yeah.
I tend to use the align right tab in my documents. But either way you do it, it works the same way. And when you use that, because the character style is strictly formatting,
right.
It's not
like an
actual,
underline.
it's not actual content. And so it just basically, all of your dot leaders just don't exist as content. It exists visually, just not as content.
Just remember though, that you still have to artifact those dot leaders. So because InDesign will not create an artifact for the underline, just like it won't create an artifact for your hyperlink underline. So when you export to PDF often and you're trying to pass the pack checker, you'll get untagged content errors because it's just a path, right? It's just a path in the content key. So you have to go into the contents panel, find it, and create an artifact. But if you're just trying to pass the Acrobat checker, it is a great solution. If you're just concerned about the user experience, it's a great solution. So definitely know that, all things have trade-offs, right? And if you're using automated remediation tools, all you have to do, like with Common Look, you open a document and save it. It automatically makes everything an artifact. I've done that many times where I'll just open it with Common Look Pro PDF, just save the document. Typically what I do, open the document, flatten my tags tree, then create a document tag and then save it. Because that's kind of the base of stripping out the document and making it a single level.
Because you have to do something. Like just opening it, you don't have the option to save it. So you got to execute something. And that's what I usually do, Dax, is I'll run some, or I'll run the validator and I'll fix a couple of things.
Yep.
And then just save it. And you're right. It's one of the things that I do like about Common Look is that whatever routine it runs, like on the automated side of things, it often fixes a lot of the stuff, that's going on with your document. So
I just wish it would fix font encoding errors. That's one of the ones where it does not. Sometimes it does, I think, in the back, but yeah, font encoding, there's not enough solutions out there. Like right now, the only one that I know of that even handles the font map at all is Access PDF. And I'd love to see more programs out there give us the ability to edit the font map.
I would too. And I will tell you, so I'm not gonna, I was talking to somebody this week and they make remediation software. They write their own remediation software. And they were telling me that their remediators use like 10 different tools.
Oh yeah.
They don't just use their tool. Even they are reaching for other tools to solve certain issues in their, when they're doing their work. So it kind of made me feel good because, I mean, that's what you and I do on the regular.
There's no one tool. You cannot, there's no one tool that does everything. It is just the way it is. So world. Let's keep going. Right. So we've talked about why TOCs are better than bookmarks. We've talked about why people don't do them. Let's talk about the structure of a TOC. When you hear a TOC, you're going to hear list 12 items. That's going to automatically parse it as a list because the TOC and TOCI, which are the two main core elements, act just like the L and the LI inside a list, right? However, after that, it starts to get tricky. And I think this is where people maybe need some guidance. So one of the things we hear most of the time is when I listen to my TOC, I hear link. And I don't understand why. Mm-hmm. Why is that, Chad?
Well, it's because, I mean, I don't know who to blame here. I suppose it's InDesign. But when InDesign structures the tags in the table of contents, it creates a reference tag.
Yep.
And then it puts a link tag inside of the reference tag.
Right.
And both of those tag types are identified as a link.
Right. They trigger JAWS and NVDA to say the word link. Because if you have a footnote and it's a reference, right? That is an internal reference. You want to hear link 1. So you hear that it is, in fact, a reference.
Yep. So,
so what's the solution?
So I would say I'll tell you my solution, right? And this is a solution that you could do in either Common Look or in PDFix. But one solution that you could do is you could say, and you may take a different approach, but I would actually find all the links and level up the children of those links so that all the content of that link is now living inside of the reference tag. And then I would simply rename the reference tags to link. So fundamentally, you have the same thing. Although now that I say that, if you have alt text on your links, you would lose it.
So there's a couple of different things I would do. The first one I would do is simply just change my reference tag to a P tag. It doesn't matter. So you have TOC, TOCI, P, link. And you're going to hear link, whatever it is. The fact that it's a reference is only a programmatic association to say this is a link to something inside the document versus a link, which is something can be inside or outside the document. But to a screen reader user, there's no differentiation between an internal link and an external link, right? So simply changing the reference tag in my TOC structure to a P tag is a great solution. The next one would be to simply level up the link tag. The link is inside the reference. You just move it up so that it's inside the TOCI.
So let's say find a reference when the child is a link and level it up.
So you'd have to go the other way around. Find a link where the parent is a reference and level it up.
And then in PD Fix, you could do the same thing. You could say, find a link whose parent is. So in PD Fix, the command is delete tags.
Yeah.
And so you would say, find a link whose parent is reference, and the delete tags would delete the reference and move everything up to take its place.
Right. It automatically levels it up. It's an implied action in the command.
Correct. Yeah.
That makes sense. So there are options to do that, right? So because people struggle, there is a guide called the PDF Syntax Guide, right? And this guide, It is the Tagged PDF Best Practices. Let me get the right name. PDF Association put out a new version of this, and it's the Tagged PDF Best Practices Syntax Guide for developers implementing ISO 14289-1. And in here, it does reference the TOC. Funny pun, I guess pun intended. But it does reference the table of contents, and it gives you several structures, possible structures that you can have in a properly formatted TOC. And one of them is TOC, TOCI, P reference, then label for like one whatever. Usually this is like a second level reference. So there's a whole series of structures that you can use. And what's interesting is when you have a nested TOC, when you have a TOC inside another TOC, we find this a lot with lists of maps or lists of tables, where there'll be a TOC for each of the chapters, and then maybe there's a TOC that just lists all the tables. That TOC is a sibling of the TOCI. Whereas in a list, you might think, oh no, it goes inside the TOCI, just like it goes inside the L. But no, it's a sibling of the TOCI. So go look at that guide. We'll link to it in the show notes or in our posts when we post about this session. But the Tag PDF Best Practices Syntax Guide is useful. It does have some good stuff in there to kind of explore what could be when it comes to TOCs. So, well, guys, I hope that this has given you some insight on TOCs, and maybe I'm hopeful that we might have changed your mind on, if you weren't doing TOCs before, that you might go take a stab at it, because it definitely helps the end user.
And I would add, it just helps all users, right?
Agreed.
And which is what we're all about in the realm of accessibility, right? We're here to help everyone, right? And so what I love about the TOC is that it's beneficial for me as a sighted user, but then as a user of AT, they also can benefit from a quick way to navigate through that document and get to the section they want. So all good stuff.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you next time. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.